right, so let's continue with SmartPy, right? So yeah, SmartPy, you can find SmartPy on smartpy.io, right? So this is their website, and when you go there, you see they have an online editor, and that's what we're going to use in this short tutorial. So now that we've covered the basics of blockchain and everything, I mean, we are just ready to move and start writing our land registration smart contract on the SmartPy platform, right? So what we have here, yeah, they have their online editor here. So when I go there, you see I already have some code. So I'm just going to try to increase the size here so that you can all see what is going on here. And then you can see that they are so good. So they have newcomer template, right? So just go ahead and click on the newcomer template. And so we are here. This is smartpy.io/dev, which is from here. They also have a command line interface. So that means you can decide not to use their online online environment. But I mean, even personally, for production purposes, I even still use the online stuff. So there's nothing wrong with that. So yeah, so they try to just explain how it works here. So you see, you write a Python, and then the Python compiles your. They have an engine that compiles your Python into Michelson, and this Michelson is what I showed you the other time. Yeah, so we'll see that very soon, right? So this is their website. You can also check it out, and also they have a reference manual here, right? So if I go to here, help, let me open it in a new tab. So you have help, and then you see reference manuals. When I click on your reference manual, I can see, like, you know, what I can do with SmartPy over here. And so we are going to go through most of these over here, right? So you see you have building blocks, expressions, commands, entry points, all of that over here. Interesting stuff, really interesting stuff. So since SmartPy is a Python library, so yeah, let's just go ahead and say, okay, we want a template, right? So we just need to have a boiler template to start with, which is good. So minimal template, and to load it for us, right? So as you can see on line 1, it's important SmartPy. Let me still increase this more. It's important SmartPy as SP, and then it already has a class which is inheriting from the sp.contract, right? This is the sp we are talking about, right? So we are going to change this name to land register, or land register contract, right? So this sp.contract refers to a contract that can be deployed onto the Tezos blockchain, right? And so if you are going to write a contract, you create a class, and then you inherit from sp.contract. And then there's one thing you also need to do, is to define the init function here. So the init function, let me just do this so that it will be very clear. This is the normal Python init, and then within that you have to call the self.init, right? So this self.init is a function that, I mean, is within this sp guy. So yeah, and then also they have loads and loads and loads. They provide a lot of tools for loads and loads, and for you to be able to run loads and loads and loads of tests, right? So let's just go ahead and change this to land register tests, right? And then let's just clear all of these away. Yeah, so just say that, and then let's say, yeah, so something like this, and then let's click here, and it runs. And you can see, so when you make changes here and you click the run here, you can see that we have whatever we typed here, land register scenario.h1 is actually like HTML, so h1 HTML header 1, right? And that's it. And then we call the this class, which is the smart contract class, and then we pass it x equals 12 inside. So this is just like for the start, right? So let's clear everything here and just leave this guy, right? So you can see that this is like a test scenario. So you have sp.test scenario, right, meaning that you're about to start writing some tests. And then when I say scenario .h1, it means I want to write something on this side, right? So h1, say what? Land register, right? Good. So when I run this again, it just leaves us with land register. Good. So now let's start with analyzing this class that we have here right now. So as I've said, this land register inherits from sp.contract, and we have to define the def init, right? We have to define the init, and also we have to define the self.init, right? We have to call the self.init from here. Now this keyword argument represents the data that is in our contract. So if I've already explained this, I'm saying that I did say that every contract is made up of what? The data and then the code, right? So let me say there's a data, and then this is the code, right? So every contract has two things, data and then code. So you need to keep this in mind. Every contract has every contract has two things, data and code, right? Good. So in SmartPy, right, this self.init here, this is where we define like our data structure, and so we'll go more into that later. So let's go ahead and remove this guy from here. So this is a class and we are just calling it with some initial parameters, right? So let's just remove that from here. And also now you can see we have here at sp.entryPoint, right? So this is a decorator that's decorating a function within this class, and the entry point, you can think of it like an endpoint. Like if you're familiar with REST architecture or REST frameworks, you call an entry point in a REST framework would be like something like API version 1 / user / edit /1, something like that. So in this case also we have something similar, which is called an entry point, because once you write this contract and you deploy it onto the blockchain, then you can then be able to call a specific function on it. Okay, so with our land register application, let's start by defining some entry point, right? So let me say register, let me say add land, add land, and then let's also define another entry point. So that means we'll call this entry point when we want to add a piece of land to the contract. And so let's go back here. So and also so for now let's say add land, right? So let's just say add land. So we have add land, to add a piece of land to the contract. Okay. so now let's then I believe with this example, the illustration here, we have you understand what the entry point means. So then let's go next to define our data, right? So when we initialize the contract, right? When we initialize the contract in SmartPy, we need to pass it. We could pass it some initial data. It's not necessarily compulsory. Maybe our contract doesn't store any data, which doesn't make sense in any way. But it's possible to have a contract that doesn't store data. But in this case, we want to store data. At least we know that we want to store data about some sort of land, right? So one thing we need to do is that we need to take notice that we want to design a contract that can be managed by someone, right? So first of all, let's say we want a manager, right? So a manager, and let me just say manager equals manager, right? So what I've done here is I've declared to SmartPy that we want to create a data structure in the contract, right, called manager, and then we are assigning it to this initial manager from this class, right? Good. So this manager is just an address. So if I think I've already explained this, but let me just do it again, because what I said is every account has three things: public key, private key, and public key hash, right? So the manager here is the address, or let me say the public key hash of someone, right, who is in charge of the whole contract, right? And this manager is going to be able to do the following things. So manager, what can the manager do? I can add registrars, right? Can remove registrars. I don't know why it just changed it to registrars. Yeah, so I think we had a wrong spelling there. And then yeah, so let's leave it at that, right? So I'm going to use this to demonstrate to you like how this whole thing works. So for now, let's just change this to add register and then remove registrar, right? And then we're going to say something like, to add a register, we want to, as we've already said here, a manager can add registrars and remove registrars. So the first thing we want to do is, when we call this endpoint add registrar, we want to check if the person calling the endpoint is the manager, right? And so when we look at the reference manual, you can see we have something here called so let's look for it, something yeah, checking condition, right? So sp.verify, so check that the boolean expression condition evaluates to true, right? And then they have sp.verify equal. It serves the same purpose by checking equality between v1 and v2. all right, that is good. And then we have Tezos specific data types. All right, so now we want to compare the person invoking the contract or running this contract or trying to call this endpoint to the manager that we stored in our data in our data here. So what we will do is we will say sp.verify equal, right? And as we've already read over here, sp.verify equal where is it? sp.verify equal, it serves the same purpose by checking equality between v1 and v2, right? Okay. So good. Anyway, so what we want to do is to compare the person who sends the contract to the manager we've stored here, right? So we are going to say sp.sender, right? So what happens is that, you know, to run or to invoke a smart contract in Tezos, okay, you need to have a Tezos account. By that I mean what I mentioned here earlier on, that having a Tezos account. So having a Tezos account means that you have these three things, right? A public key, a private key, and then a public key hash, right? And it's this public key hash that you usually see, right? So an example of a public key hash, we'll see an example of a public key hash very soon, right? So we want to say, okay, we want to compare that the sender, sp.sender, right, So that means the person invoking this contract. So once this contract is ready, we will see that the person invoking this contract is what is referred to as sp.sender. And it says we want to verify v1 and v2. We want to compare them if they are equal. So we say we put v1 here and then v2 there, right? And we've already stored the manager here, right? So to get access to data within the contract itself, you have to say self, right, dot data. Okay, so this is data that is stored within the contract itself. And so if they are equal, then we don't have any problem. But if they are not, then what we are going to say is maybe unauthorized, right? Action. You are not manager. And once this contract is invoked, right, from any client, if the sender is not, or the person invoking the contract is not the manager, then what will happen is the person is going to get this unauthorized, you are not a manager response, right? So this is, usually when you're writing this code, there are two aspects, right? This is like the contract aspect, and then the client aspect as the final app that the user will use, or maybe a web application. And from there you can interact with this contract, and there are libraries that to help you do that. But that's not the point of this tutorial. So once we are done with everything here, we would actually interact with the contract. We can actually interact with the contract using SmartPy itself, right? I mean, their environment, they have all of those things in play. Okay, and so and then we want to say we want to add a registrar, right? But where are we adding the registrar? Since we need to define a place where we are going to store the registers, right? So we're going to say we are going to define another data registrars, and then we are going to say is equal to registrars, right? And then we are going to, so you don't have to always initialize your smart contract data, but in this case we want to, when we are deploying the contract, we want to be able to set some initial registrars or people who can register users on the contract. And then once that is done, we can call add registrar to add extra registers, right? So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to say something like registrars dot add, right? So what are we adding? We are going to, since this is endpoint is calling add registrar, I mean we are going to add some registrar, but from where, right? So you can see that in this entry point functions we have something called params. Now it is in this params that contains like all the data we are sending to the smart contract whilst calling this endpoint, right? So we are going to get that data from this params. So let's say we want to say that when we are calling this add registrar functionality, we are going to add a registrar field to the parameters, so to params. So let's just say params dot registrar, right? So that's it, and that's it for that, right? It adds a new registrar. Okay, so to run it and actually see how this works, so first of all, let's create, we need to run this test and test what is happening here. And so for testing purposes, SmartPy allows you to create fake user accounts, right in their editor. Okay, so what we have here, so when you go to test and test scenarios, that's where you see everything regarding tests, right? And we're going to find the plus. Yes, so we have this called sp.test account. So this test account functionality in sp allows us to create users that have public key hash, public key, and then what, secret key or private key, right? So let's create a manager account called sp.test account, and we call it manager, just that. So it's just the name you put here, that's what makes differentiate it from others. And then let's create some registers, some initial registers, right? So we call r1 is equal to sp.test account registrar 1, and then I'm gonna copy this and paste it. So registrar 2 straight, right? 2. Okay, so yeah, and then now we can call our contract. So let's say c is equal to, then we initialize our contract land registrar. So this is all just allowing us to test, right? So this is not like actually on the Tezos blockchain. This is just SmartPy environment giving us all the tools we need to run and test our chain, our contract, before we deploy, or we get a microsync code and then deploy onto the blockchain. So we'll get into that very soon. So land register, right? And then what are the initial parameters? This is just like a normal Python class. So we have the manager, right? So manager equals manager, right? And then you also have the registers, right, equals, now we have a list of registers, so r1 comma r2 comma r3, right? So that's that. Now what I said, this sp.test account allows you to create fake Tezos account, right, just for testing in this environment. And so we could do a little exploration. Okay, so as we can see here, this is a normal Python list. Okay, but how we want to store the registers is not, we don't want to store them as a list, we want to store them as a set. Okay, because so in Python you would say set of this list, but this is not Python, this is SmartPy. And so to apply a set in SmartPy, you see we have SmartPy types and operators, and then when I come here I can see something called set, right? So to create a set in SmartPy, you could have what, a Python list, and then you call it sp.set, and then you put the list in there. So that's what you're going to do. So you're going to create sp.set, right? And so now this is a set. Okay, and now the next thing is to say scenario plus equals c. So what does this mean? So this scenario, as I've said, is a test scenario, and that's what everything that displays here is the test scenario. So when I say plus equals c, it's only saying that it should add whatever this contract outputs to this interface here, right? So let me run this. No, we have an error. It says registers is not defined. All right, and then it gives you the line SmartPy line 35. Okay, so when you go to line 35, it says registers is not defined. Wait a minute. Okay, so let me run it again. I think I missed it. Okay. Oh yeah. So actually the error is where in line 17, where we just said registers. But if you remember, to get the data inside the smart contract, you have to say self.data and then dot that data. And as I've said, this cell.init is where we store all our data relating to the smart contract, right? And so the SP contract class takes care of everything for us. It just say we should just do it like this, and so that's how we do it. Data dot registers. Right. So let me just run this again, and now we're getting a different error. And so actually I wanted us to see this error. And what is it saying? So what are we passing here? sp.set r1, r2, and r3, right? And as I said, this one is a full test account. What that means is that it returns three things. The three things I mentioned here. That's a public key, private key, and public key hash, right? But we are not allowed, okay, to store private key on the smart contract, because then everybody will see it, and once your private key is exposed, then it means that people can have access to your account and can execute the smart contract in your name. They can take your money away and all of that. So the private key needs to be private, seriously. And so what we need to do is to say we need to get the address, and by the address I mean the public key hash, right? So anytime you hear address, it means public key hash. And yeah, oh damn it. Okay, so it's no problem at all. Errors happen everywhere. So type error. Okay.